Ars Victor limited edition. Big, heavy, sturdy box with some goofy, cartoonish art on the cover, which is the same goofy, cartoonish art that you will find in the components. Ars Victor, the 1 hour war game. It's very important, 1 hour. Once I played the game, it was 65 minutes, I felt very guilty. There's a 2-player card-driven war game that plays in about an hour, and that is set in some sort of non-historical sci-fi fantasy world. As I understand, initially it was mainly sci-fi, but then in this edition here there are 60 more units, a new faction which adds more of a fantasy flavor to it. Pretty simple game, introductory game, probably playable with fairly young gamers that maybe you want to introduce to wargaming, or maybe you want to play a light war game without having to spend, say, 90 minutes. Even though setup is kind of part of the game, there is a part where you build your army, where you build the board, so that may take a little longer, but still, very manageable game, not a monster by any means. Let me show you how the game plays. The game is played on this board, in a sense, in a board kind of like this one. You have 9 pieces of terrain that are also double-sided, and you can combine them in a variety of ways at the end, as long as at the end the general layout looks like this and fits between these 2 frames here. Players will deploy their units initially in the 2 rows on the opposite sides of the board, and then they can bring in further units as the game progresses from their edge. At the beginning of the game, so players build the map, but they build it together, building the map, alternating, placing pieces as part of the strategy itself. Once the map has been organized, you place these X's here, which have a purple edge. You place them on the board in these locations that you see here. These are key points in the game. You score points for occupying them. Even though scoring points may not be the right word, you force the opponent to lose points. Each side has a certain amount of glory, which is quantified by using markers that move on this track here. And when you inflict damage or moral losses on the opponent, the glory goes down, and you win the game when you reduce the glory of your opponent to 0. If you're occupying these hexes, then you reduce the glory of the opponent. You also reduce the glory of the opponent if you have a headquarter on the map and your opponent doesn't, which may be because you destroyed their headquarter or because they decided not to bring it on the map yet. And also you reduce the glory of your opponent by eliminating enemy units. As for the amount of glory that you get, at the beginning of the game you have 80 points that you can use to build your army by purchasing units, and the points that you do not spend from your initial allowance become your glory points. So if I spend 50 points to build my armies, then I will have 30 left, which means the stronger your army is, the weaker it is morally from the point of view of glory. Which is weird, which is very weird thematically, but it works well in terms of gameplay, because it forces you to keep a balance between the effectiveness of your army, the punch that it can deal, and how much damage it can take before it loses heart and before you lose the game. Fighting units in this game are represented by these counters here, with this pretty cartoonish art on them. I guess not everybody will like it. Some of this art I personally don't enjoy all that much, but I think there is a function in art that is so silly and cartoonish. If you're trying to play the game with a very young player, the art is not, say, disturbing, it can even be attractive. But this guy, look how happy he is. What was in his coffee this morning? I don't know. This is for the art. Relevant information, the small number here in the yellow area is the cost to purchase the unit at the beginning of the game. Also, it is the amount of points that you lose in glory when the unit is destroyed. The other number is the number of life points. When a number of hits equal to or exceeding that number is inflicted on the unit is removed from the game. You have an area indicating the dice that the unit rolls in close combat. These triangles indicate the movement capability, and there may be an area here at the bottom that indicates the range attack capability and the range at which the unit can attack an opponent. You will see that there are also a lot of other symbols here. They represent special abilities. This is what makes the game a little harder to learn than otherwise it could be, but it also gives a lot of variety and flavor to the game, so it's not bad. And you will find that a problem, you can just start with a couple of battles where you have units that do not have many symbols, and you learn the game that way, and then you add more abilities and skills. When you bring a unit to the battlefield, you place it on one of these tiles here. You have a set, and a player is blue player, a player is red player. These tiles have 4 symbols, 2 on one side and 2 on the other. These are the suits that are used to activate units. So for example, I want to give this guy this suit, that's how I put it. Here I have an area where I place markers indicating the number of hits that the unit has. I'll give swords to this guy. I'll give a tower to this guy, and so on and so forth. The idea is that units that have the same suit tend to activate together. Units with the same color, gray or yellow, also tend to activate together. Units of different color, yellow and gray, never activate together. So you can have a lot of variety with small groups of units activating very often, or you may have larger groups of units that activate all together, but maybe not that often. Because this is a card-driven wargame, you do need to play cards to activate your units. During your turn, you will choose a card from your hand of 5, and you will play it, and you will receive a number of commands equal to the number of such symbols that you see on the card. There's also a number there to remind you. And this indicates the type of units that can be activated. So if I play this card, I receive 6 commands which can be used to activate units with that symbol. They can also be used to activate units with the other yellow symbol, this one, but at a higher cost. For example, to give a move order to a unit, you spend 1 command if you're doing activating a unit with a matching symbol, and to give an attack order to a unit of the matching symbol, you spend 2 commands. A unit of the matching color but not the matching symbol takes an extra command, that is 2 to move and 3 to attack. Units of different color cannot be activated. So this gives you some flexibility, but not total flexibility. And of course, you have to keep track of the cards that you played. That gives you a sense of what are still available. But this is the main engine of the game. So during your turn, well, at the beginning, you check to see if you're able to bleed glory from the opponent. If you are meeting conditions that allow you to force the opponent to lose glory, then you play a card. You take the command tokens corresponding to the number of tokens represented on your card, and you spend them to activate units. As I said, units can move or attack. Those are the only 2 orders available. If you give a unit a move order, then the unit can move up to the number of movement points of hexes represented by the triangles, ignoring the color. So if I'm activating this unit for movement, it can move by 2 hexes. And there is terrain that can, for example, force the unit to stop when the unit enters that terrain, for example, the forest. That's pretty much it for movement. You move up to the number of X's equal to the number of triangles on the moving unit. You have to stop when you move adjacent to an opponent you're engaged, or gamers call this zone of control. If you give a unit an assault, an attack order, then the unit can still move, but only up to the number of green triangles. In this case, this unit, if ordered to attack, can move by 1 triangle only and then attack. This unit only has green triangles, so whether it is activated to move or to attack, to move only or to move and attack, it still can move up to 3 hexes. It is only the yellow triangles that are available with movement order, but not with attack orders. If you're adjacent to an opponent, you can use close combat, in which case you look at the dice that are indicated on your close combat ability and you roll them. Not all dice are born equal. There are 3 types of dice. White are the weakest, red a little bit better, blue are the best. When talking about combat, I always would like red to be the strongest. It just makes sense that way to me. But here blue is the strongest. So you roll the amount of dice that you receive and you execute, you implement the results. There's several types of skulls on the dice. Some skulls that have a bang out symbol around them, and some who don't. Some skulls are full, some are only outlined. All skulls are regular hits. It is just that some units are able to defend better against certain types of hits. For example, units that have the tough ability take 2 of these outlined hits to deliver a single hit, and units that have the bug out ability, those are sneaky units that can get the bug out of a bad situation, and if they take the option of using that maneuver, then only these hits apply to them. They also have to move away from combat though. So you apply the hits. Oh, there's also another result, which is the push result, which will force a unit to move away from you. So you roll the dice, you implement the result, attacks, hits, pushes. If after the attack the opponent is still in the hex where the opponent was attacked, then the opponent can counterattack, and the opponent in that case simply rolls the appropriate amount of dice. In this case it would be 3 red dice. Range attacks, same idea, just range. You need to take range into account. You use the different dice, but the general idea is still the same. Terrain will affect combat. Some types of terrain will block the line of sight, so you cannot perform a range attack through some hexes. If the target is in a terrain that lends cover, then all range attacks dice turn white, so they are degraded that way. If the defender is in impeding terrain, which is pretty much any type of terrain, when you're attacking, then both sides roll half close combat dice when attacking and counter-attacking. And some types of terrain will slow you, will force you to stop, but the important thing here is that some terrains will reduce the number of dice or lower the quality of the dice that you roll. You roll the dice, you add once to the units, depending on whether they took damage or not and how much they took, and that's it. You activate your units, move and attack, the opponent goes, next turn starts, and you alternate like this until one of the players has been brought down to 0 glory points. Then at that point the opponent is the winner. And there's also the possibility that the cards run out, players run out of cards. In that case, the player that has most glory at that point is the winner of the game. The first thing that stands out as you play the game is how similar the mechanics are to some other very known games, in particular the commands and color system. When you think about the cards that activate units at the tactical level, because they're card-driven games, of course, with different scales. Here on the tactical level, only some units will activate depending on the cards. That's the first thing that you think of. Also, different dice or amounts of dice that are rolled depending on the situation. You may think of that, and probably that's correct. That probably was one of the inspirations of the game. But I don't know that there is any legal ownership on mechanics. If that was the case, I think most games with hex encounters would be in trouble because they would owe something to somebody else. Most games with dice, maybe. The point is that even though the inspiration to me is absolutely clear and evident, this game adds enough personality, enough twists on the known plot to be its own thing, to deliver a different kind of game experience. what you have here is a different degree of flexibility. Something that drives players of CNC games nuts at times is that you cannot activate units on one side of the board because you get only cards for the other side. To me, that's still at least partially the player's fault, because there are ways of preventing that. And heck, just distribute your forces a little more evenly. Keep your options open. Especially with the commands and color Napoleonics, there are ways to go around the problem of the useless hand of cards. Here, you have even more flexibility because you can activate units that can be potentially anywhere. You have 3 units of a suit and you place them in different parts of the board, then they're able to deliver some damage or to occupy useful terrain with just one activation. You can activate all across the board, or you can choose to concentrate the forces in one side and another type of forces in another area. Then you play more like commands and color style, but you have chosen to do so. Also, the fact that you can simply spend extra resources, extra commands to activate units a little less effectively than if you're using the ideal suit, but still better than not activating at all. It seems to me like this was a game designed by somebody who played commands in college and thought, I don't like the fact that only certain areas are activated by each card. What can I do to fix it? And I think this is a good fix. Not that I think it was a problem with commands and colors, but I like to have a variant. I like to have a different take on this. And I think this is a very successful take. If you did think that that idea in commands and colors was a problem, then look no further. Now you have a game that doesn't have to deal with that, where you do not have to deal with that problem. And generally speaking, of course, not just in comparison with that well-known and respected game system, this is a game that has enough flavor and personality to be its own thing. It is card-driven with a lot of interesting tactical choices, with that random element given by the cards, but so many ways in which you can experiment with different sequences of actions to maximize your chances of being successful. Earlier on, for example, you can play lower cards as you're bringing units to the board. Then when you have a lot, you can play higher cards, or you can save the higher cards for emergencies when you have to activate units less effectively, so you need to spend more resources. A lot of ways so in which you can manipulate things by choosing the tiles with the suits of your armies, from armies that are very specialized to armies that are incredibly flexible and eclectic. You can try without different combination, just with the tiles with the suits. Then you of course add different armies with different types of units, from those that are fast and not particularly strong, those that are slow and heavy and deliver a heavy blow. Range units, mortar units are pretty interesting because they have indirect fire, so they can fire over obstacles, but they cannot move and attack. They have their own limitations. It feels very thematic, even though some of these units, of course, I've never seen before. It's sort of like weird sci-fi. It still feels like each individual unit has its own strengths and weaknesses, so there's a lot of experimenting that you can do by combining things in different ways. If anything, at the beginning, it can be a little daunting, the first game or two, to build your army. It may take a while for you to figure out a good army. Experiment. If it doesn't work, you only spent an hour and you can try again. The game, of course, can last much less than an hour if one of the two players built a very weak army or simply did not play very well. But fret not, there are also pre-built scenarios in the game, so if you're playing the game for the first time, you're learning the game, or you just don't want to go through the process of figuring out an army, you can just use one of the generated scenarios with the army list, and that's it. So this is a game that looks nice component-wise. The art looks okay to me, but I can see the appeal, I can see the advantage to attract young gamers to this game. The level of complexity can be tweaked by choosing units with more or less abilities. Very flexible game. That's what I like about the game. There is a great replay value and a great variety of ways in which the game can be set up, can be played, and sometimes you will have to change your strategy as you go because of the cards that you receive and because of what the opponent does. light war game, a good introductory war game. To me, historical games somehow have an extra gear. I'm just more attracted by those. I like to learn about the historical situation as I play the game. For a non-historical game, this is a very respectable one. Personally, I enjoy playing Ars Victor, and if you're looking for a simple game, simple in terms of rules, but with still a very good amount of depth and hard decisions to make and meaningful decisions to make, then Ars Victor could definitely be a good choice for you.